Welcome back into In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you here on a Friday. Merry belated Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy whatever you celebrate. Hope you enjoyed the holiday. Maybe you're still enjoying the holiday. As I mentioned, a couple of shows ago, or maybe it was Monday's show, I can't remember. But, some of you might be enjoying, some extended time off right now. If that's you, then again, as I mentioned previously, kudos. But not all of us have that luxury. So welcome in to a Friday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Hope you had a Merry Christmas. As always, have a very good Christmas. There's something about the Christmas holiday that it doesn't matter what year it is, doesn't matter what struggles you might be going through, whether they be family issues, whether they be financial issues. And I'm not saying that I fall into either of those categories. I'm just saying I know it can be a stressful time for people. But for me, anytime those things have been a part of, the Christmas stress, the holiday stress, whatever it may be, something about Christmas morning, the day of Christmas, that's always just kind of felt like everything stops. Everything slows down to a screeching halt. Maybe that's not a pleasant image to put into your mind right now, but something about waking up, and even though it's just my wife and I right now, this is my wife and I's final Christmas without our baby, of course, but there's just something, I don't know what it is. I know I kind of feel like I'm just dancing around my thoughts right now, but I'm having trouble describing it, but maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just that indescribable, the overwhelming amount of peace that comes with Christmas morning. Feels like there's nothing to worry about. You can sit there and be in the moment with everything that's going on. And of course, just me and my wife grabbing a cup of coffee, open the gifts we got each other, playing some Christmas music on in the background. And I like the traditional Christmas songs. I'm not the kind of person that listens to Christmas music during the entire season. But on Christmas morning, for example, this year, turned the TV on, opened up Spotify, and my Christmas music of choice is the Mark Tremonti, Frank Sinatra covers. And some of you are probably like, what in the world is that? And I know you probably know who Sinatra is, of course. If you don't, then you're just probably not a big music person. But Mark Tremonti and Justin Beard, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. You always understand my music tastes, I feel like, more than many people who listen or at least comment on this show. But yeah, Mark Tremonti is the guitarist for Creed. And he's also got a very good Sinatra. I don't want to call it an impersonation, but he does cover. He's recorded 2 cover albums, one of them being the Christmas album of Sinatra songs. But I queued that up on the TV. That looped 3 or 4 times throughout the morning and afternoon, and it was a very enjoyable Christmas holiday. So hopefully you, your family, whoever it may be, hopefully you got to enjoy the Christmas day as well. Or maybe it's Christmas Eve that's more special to you. I know everybody has their own traditions and things that they deem important to them, and that's what's great about humanity, right? We're all very unique, and we all do things our own way, and that makes us special human beings. So great way to ease us into this Friday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Again, for those of you keeping track, this is a lot of episodes in a row that I've been releasing them early. Just want to give you the heads up. That's probably not going to be normal. The reason that that's happening is because, as mentioned, some people, especially those that I work with, are off for an extended period of time. And that keeps me at my day job a lot longer. And therefore, I record, at least I had the last couple of episodes and probably the next few leading into next week as well. I'm recording a lot the night before, including today's show. So this one will release early, and probably to many of your, to the pleasure of many of you is the phrasing I'm looking for. And honestly, I kind of, there's good and bad that comes with that, because, I knock it out Don't have to worry about it the next day. But of course, I'm at work for a lot longer. And that, you know, there's always give and take with everything, right? Nothing's perfect in this world, except I guess Christmas morning, as I was describing just a couple of minutes ago. Um, but yeah, so let's just cut to the chase, I guess, shall we? Coming up here in a few minutes, Dylan Traeger is going to join me from HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm going to kind of recap things that have gone on with Indiana basketball so far this season, as well as look ahead to really what's coming up for the Hoosiers. Because as you've heard me allude to a few different times on this show now, especially the last week or two, is that this Indiana basketball team is very much at an is in an uncomfortable spot. And I know many of you are. It doesn't matter what happens moving forward. You've already made up your mind that Mike Woodson needs to go, and because many of you are very forward thinking, and that can be a very good thing. But at the same time, the way that I think, and again, it's kind of me playing devil's advocate here, even though I can kind of see the direction things are going, and I can kind of predict where I think this team and season may end up, they also still have to play the games. Like, there's still very much a lot of time left for this Indiana team to figure things out. And I think this team, as we've mentioned time and again, has the personnel to, if they can finally figure it out. And I'm not going to say the thing that Mike Woodson always says, because you all know what it is, and I'm not going to. It's almost just fun to not mention it, because we all know the infamous. How many words is it? It's 3 words that Mike Woodson loves to say during post-game press conferences that it drives the fans nuts, especially after losses. And that's usually when he mentions that, of course. So, but if this team can just start clicking and get, find consistent play, because I mean, I'm not trying to compare this Indiana team to UConn, but Dan Hurley's UConn team before their first championship a couple of years ago, they had a pretty up and down year before they really kind of found their stride during the midway point of the season. And so I know people are ready to write off this year. I'm not ready to do that just yet, because that's no fun. And maybe other people are ready to do that. They've seen enough, especially those who are more in the know than I am. I'm just your average Joe doing an Indiana sports show for HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm not somebody who has an in with the program. I don't know a bunch of head coaches or anything like that. I don't have any ins with the university. And I don't know if any of you all ever assumed that about me, but if you did, and you're just now learning that I'm not one of those people, then yeah, I'm sorry about I'm sorry that you thought that, I guess. But I'm sure many of you realize that this show is just my commentary. It's really just an Indiana fan's thoughts, and I feel like I'm fairly realistic with a lot of things. And I feel like that's one of the best things that I bring to the table when it comes to this type of stuff, because I feel like I'm able to even if I have emotional investment in things, I feel like I'm able to stay in the middle lane and see things for what they are, and not veer too far in one direction or the other. But again, don't want to talk about that any further, just because there's no need. But yeah, Indiana basketball, very uncomfortable spot to be in. They, of course, have one more non-conference game this weekend against Winthrop. And again, you'll hear me mention with Dylan that there's not a whole lot we're going to learn about this team in general. But if there's one thing that you just want to see, just don't have what happened against Chattanooga occur this Sunday. I believe it's Sunday that the game is against the Eagles. But just be more dominant. You've had some time to recuperate. You've had the holidays now, and you're one game away from fully getting into the thick of the Big Ten slate. And you have one more tune-up opportunity to kind of begin feeling good before you jump into what's really important. And, of course, that being the rest of the Big Ten season. So talking more about that with Dylan Traeger, also giving our kind of really kind of hearing his closing thoughts on the season, then also reacting to what's been a heck of a great week for Indiana football in the transfer portal. And I want to go ahead and rattle off some of these names right now because we don't go through all of them during our segment here coming up in just a moment. But here's what Kurt Signetti has done in the transfer portal so far. He's brought in, of course, quarterback Fernando Mendoza from California, to a pair of running backs to kind of replace Tyson Lawton, as well as Justice Ellison, one being Roman Hemby from Maryland, the other being Lee Beebe Jr. from UAB. Brought in a wide receiver from App State, who I believe was, I don't know if he was first team all Sun Belt, but he was on one of the all Sun Belt teams. Mekhi Jackson was. So that adds to your wide receiver depth. And then you got tight end Riley Nowakowski. You brought in a couple of defensive linemen, Hosea Wheeler from WKU and Dominique Radcliffe. I believe he's from Texas State. You got defensive back Amarian Knighton. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And then a couple of special teams players, Brendan Frank and Mitch McCarthy, who are both believed to be some of the best at what they do. And hopefully we'll continue to improve the special teams ability of this Indiana Hoosiers squad going into 2025. And that's not even including the important pieces that have announced that they're going to stay for 2025. So Indiana Hoosiers football is already set up to continue the success that they had this year and transfer it over to the 2025 campaign. And I'd be lying if I told you I wasn't excited already, because especially when it was, as we're talking about the uncertainty of Indiana basketball. And of course I want both programs to thrive, because that's just more fun for all of us when you can have things going great for both of your major programs. And that's not to say that baseball or women's basketball or men's soccer, those teams doing well, it's not saying that they're not great things if they're having great seasons. But for Indiana, it's always going for any school, football is always going to be up there. Even if you're good or not, you want your football team to do well. And that's just the facts. Football will always bring in the most money, especially if things are going well. And that helps. That can only help the rest of your programs. But of course, with Indiana specifically, Indiana basketball is always going to be up there as well. And in many people's hearts, it will always be number one. And to have that 1-2 punch, if they're able to find big levels of success, that's of course the recipe that Indiana is still trying to find. And it doesn't mean it can't happen this year for Indiana basketball. It's just we're at a very weird spot, as I keep going back to talking about that type of stuff. So let's go ahead, and I'll go ahead and transition into our conversation with Dylan so we can go ahead and keep talking all things Indiana basketball and football. And then we'll get into a few other things on the other side. And then we'll wrap it up. This may be a shorter episode today. I'm not quite sure. Of course, at the time of this recording, I haven't finished the entire thing yet. But we'll see. It wouldn't surprise me if I do shorten things here a little bit here on a Friday. And then, especially, I believe Monday's episode ended up being almost an hour and 20 minutes long. So maybe I owe it to myself to shorten things a little bit today. So without further ado, Dylan Traeger of HoosierIllustrated.com here to talk Indiana basketball, football, and more here on a Friday on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Joining me now here on a Friday, it is HoosierIllustrated.com's very own Dylan Traeger. Dylan, belated Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Hope you enjoyed your Christmas.
Yeah, happy holidays to you too, John, to everyone else watching in this. Great to be back home from school, a little winter break action. Good to be done with classes and just relax and watch some sports and kick back now.
Yeah, so you're in Chicago. What is it like being in that large of a city for, the holiday season like Christmas?
It's a little weird because, you don't really go out, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. And so, I wasn't really thinking, so I tried to go to the gym both days, and
Okay.
I forgot that they both would be closed, and the streets were empty, so it's a little weird, and I'm not used to it, but right now there's no snow and it's 45 degrees out, so it's kind of a weird time.
It is weird because I do feel like we had some pretty we had some colder temperatures kind of off and on over the last few weeks, really throughout the entire month of December. But right whenever you want it, right, the Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, we get this kind of nasty or middle tier weather, whatever you want to call it. Hopefully it's not raining. That's the absolute worst when it's like 50 or 60 degrees and it's raining. That's the nasty Christmas weather that hopefully none of you got to experience. It's been a while since I've had a true white Christmas to really enjoy.
I think this is perfect. I mean, if there's no snow and there's no rain, it's just cold and cloudy, like, I enjoy that, but, like, we went up to the Notre Dame game, Alec, Kyler, and I, and it wasn't really snowing, but it was like 20 degrees and it was windy and freezing, and like
Yeah.
that's where it crosses the line. Like that's where I don't like it. When there's no snow and there's no rain, but it's just freezing and it's super windy and it's not enjoyable to be outside. That's where it hurts me.
I got to show you this real quick, Dylan. I know you probably don't watch the show on a regular basis, but I showed this on Wednesday or on Monday's show. This was an early Christmas gift I got. It is a replica Old Oaken bucket, and it is now officially my prized possession for Indiana memorabilia. And I'm very excited to have this in my
Can you
collection.
plug the link for that in the chat so I can get one of those too?
Plug the link. So I believe it was bought on, I think it's called rivalrytrophies.com. I'm not 100% sure if that's what it is, but the box that it came in was an official, it had the Big Ten logo on it. So I believe it's an official, Big Ten trophy. And I think you can buy all of the different ones for whichever, trophy you're looking for any of the rivalries for the conference. So yeah, if you're looking, I think it was pretty expensive. I don't know the exact price tag on it, but I don't think it was, a budget buy, if that makes sense.
Maybe next season, me and you can walk around Purdue on game day trying to sell those in a tailgate field before the game. We can make a little hustle there.
Yeah, I like it. It's very heavy duty as well, so it's nice for it to kind of feel like kind of the real thing. So
That's a great gift. That's awesome.
We'll get into football stuff here in a little bit, but I do want to start off with a little bit of Indiana basketball conversation, just because really we've kind of been in a bit of a lull in general with things going on at IU because of Christmas break. We did have the Chattanooga game right after Indiana lost to Notre Dame in the college football playoff, kind of in really, I hate to say what you would expect from this Indiana basketball team, but it's what we've come to expect with Mike Woodson teams. They ultimately get the job done against opponents like Chattanooga, but they make it a little too close for comfort throughout the entirety of the game. And you're going to have another matchup similar to that when you face Winthrop on Sunday before you finally jump fully back into the conference slate on Thursday of next week, January 2nd. And it's just kind of a very weird place that the Indiana basketball program is in right now.
It's really weird to describe it because it was the same situation last year where Indiana couldn't really hold their own against these non-conference games that are essentially bye games. You saw it against Miami, Ohio, home, I think a few weeks ago. Indiana really couldn't get over the hump and keep the lead their way for a good margin.
And of course, that being the phrase that Mike Woodson loves to say, getting over the hump.
Yeah, and I mean, sure, they won it by whatever it was, 20 to 25 points, but it's not until the last, 5 to 8 minutes of the game where they really have it put away. And it was the same thing against Chattanooga last Saturday. The whole first half, it was really back and forth. Nothing was really for sure, and it's Indiana pulling it away the last few minutes. And that's what makes these non-conference games really tough to watch because there's nothing on the table. Indiana, if they win it, Indiana gains nothing from that. And all you're seeing is just negativity on the court and losing hope from this team. So when you want to see them play better against these non-conference teams to have some hope going into the conference schedule, you're not getting any of that, which makes it really tough.
Yeah, and we're ultimately not going to learn a whole lot about where this team is truly heading until we see them play Again, Rutgers on Thursday. After that, they'll go on the road and play Penn State. You follow that up with another home game against USC. Not the best of the best in the conference, of course, but that's a very manageable 3 games to get things rolling in January. And I hate to put any sort of, automatic expectation, because here's the thing. We know that this team is kind of, we'll just say mediocre right now. The ceiling, I don't really know what it is. The floor, we really don't know what it is. They're kind of in no man's land, which is not where you want to be at this point in the season, I feel like. But as when you think of Indiana basketball being the powerhouse that they want to be, you look at Rutgers, Penn State, and USC, and you think those should be games that Indiana should take care of business in. Now, if that ends up not being the case, of course, then we'll end up having to kind of steer the conversation in a direction that, of course, is not always fun, which it would likely mean the season wouldn't be heading in the way in which fans would hope it would be, especially in year 4 of Mike Woodson after having the down year last year where the noise got so loud, really louder than I think many people ever anticipated it being after the first 2 seasons. And it's not like he had a great deal of success, but the teams were good. They comfortably, for at least the second team, comfortably got in the NCAA tournament. The first one kind of got the monkey off of the back just by getting back into the tournament, even though it was in the first 4. And now you find yourself in the position similar to really where you've been at every point during Mike Woodson's tenure so far, at this point in the season, I should say. And it makes it kind of just, we're at a crossroads. I may have mentioned that already, or may have mentioned that to you off the air. I can't really remember, but it's a very uncomfortable place to be in for IU.
I had a really high expectation going into the season. I think everyone did. On paper, this team looked really good. I thought Mike Woodson killed it in the transfer portal, and I thought there was a lot of young talent coming in. A lot of people thought they were going to go far in March Madness, and I think you can still have that expectation. This team is really good on paper, but I can't expect Indiana to have all these Big Ten games be, automatic wins, even against, rougher opponents. You saw versus Minnesota. There were times where Indiana was struggling to hang in there. Minnesota is a bottom 3 or 5 team in the conference. There was a lot of struggles against that Nebraska game on the road. And I think with the way the conference is, just no game is free, and they really got to bring it out. I think if the team can do everything correctly, like the shooting's going down, you see when Carlisle and Tucker can do what they need to do off the bench, and when you can find a way to really rotate the bigs around, maybe things can change. But I haven't liked what I've seen lately. Just there's been so many different issues and all sorts of categories.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to kind of go back and mention, I know the 3 teams I rattled off, I made it seem like that they're just teams that if Indiana were as good as they're supposed to be, that they should roll over them. That's not absolutely the case. Rutgers does have some talent, especially with their 2 young freshmen, Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. And then Penn State, they've already upset Purdue earlier on this season. And we know Purdue's kind of taken a step back after losing Zach Edey and just kind of readjusting to what life is like without him. And if I'm being honest, I don't know a whole lot about what USC brings to the table so far this year. The first thing I think of when I think of USC is Bronny James from last season. And of course, he's no longer a part of that squad. But at the same time, one thing that Kyler and I have talked about, and I'm sure this has been probably beaten to death from many of the talking heads, but anytime you go on the road in conference play and you're able to steal one, I mean, that's exactly what it is. I hate to say you're not expected to win your road games, but you're more often than not going to be, playing your best basketball, so to speak, especially when you think about from an offensive standpoint. That doesn't always travel when you go to these road environments, whether it be a Penn State, an Iowa, whoever it may be. But if you're able to take care of your home floor, as I was kind of mentioning, and find a way to steal some of those more winnable road games, I thought Nebraska was in that category. Unfortunately, they didn't get the job done a couple of weeks ago. But that's going to be the recipe for finding yourself not only just back in the NCAA tournament, but I think for if you're wanting the fans to feel a little more satisfaction about where the direction that Indiana basketball could be heading, you don't want to just find your way in the tournament, being a bubble team in late February, early March. You want to kind of get to that point in the season and know that you're a tournament team. If we get to that portion of the schedule and you're not where you want to be, not only is the noise going to be very loud for moving on from Mike Woodson, it's just going to be a very unfun situation to be a part of overall for the fan base, for the players, everyone involved with Indiana basketball.
Right. And I mean, the players have such a high expectation for this team. The fans bring the highest expectation every season with what they've seen over the course of all these years. But I definitely agree. You want to start getting ahead early and not have to try to struggle late like they did kind of last season. I don't think it will take much to turn this team around. Maybe a little momentum, a couple wins in a row in Big Ten play, and just break out these kinks. I mean, Indiana's lucky to have these breaks right now in between games, getting whatever it is, 7 or 8 days in a row off. Got to be practicing and figuring these things out and just be ready to play in these next Big Ten games that are coming up.
It's just finding consistency, because the best way for this team, and this goes for any team, not just Indiana, go into January. And I know Indiana will play on Sunday before they jump into conference play. But go into January when you jump back into Big Ten play fully, feeling like you're in a clean slate. What happened back against the teams in the battle for Atlantis? Yeah, it's unfortunate, but you can't change it now. You have to forget about it. It's on the resume. It is what it is. Move on from it and start playing consistent basketball. What happened in those first 2 Big Ten basketball games? Those are already done. One of them you played pretty well in. Again, it was against one of the worst teams in the conference in Minnesota. The other game, and I know we talked a little bit about Nebraska earlier, I feel like they played well. Nebraska just played a lot better than Indiana in that game. And there was a point in which it just kind of felt like there was a lid on the basket at the end of the second half. And some can chalk that up to just Indiana taking bad shots. And, of course, that ended up being the game where Indiana took more three-pointers than they had in, I think it was since 2016. So it was a very kind of different Indiana basketball experience from what we've grown accustomed to in the last several years. But the biggest thing for this team, if you just want to start with a clean slate, get off on the right foot. I've said this before. If you find a way to lose to Rutgers, and again, it makes it seem like I'm talking down to the ability of this Rutgers team, but this Rutgers team specifically has shown that even though they have talented pieces, they don't really have it all put together. Kind of similar to how Indiana is. They've dropped a few games that they probably shouldn't have. And really, I bet both Indiana and Rutgers, when they face each other on January 2nd, both of them are going to be looking at that matchup as like, okay, one of us is going to win this and kind of get us rolling into January and be able to use that potentially as a springboard for the next portion of the season. And the other one's going to be looking down and wondering, like, what's going on? Why can't we figure this out? And Indiana does not want to be on that side of that situation.
And I think it's also unfortunate that Indiana sort of had that time already to figure things out. And I would say a pretty easy schedule outside of that Atlantis tournament, or a lot of easy non-conference games. And to start off your conference schedule with Minnesota and Nebraska, they've had the time to figure that out. And that window is closing to figure things out and get some momentum rolling. And if you can't get it by the time those conference games roll around and mid to late January, you're really running out of time. And I think this is something that not only Mike Woodson's going to realize, but a lot of the fans are going to jump on. And you see how early the fans have jumped onto this idea early in the season already, and just get ready for what happens if in case that ship does sail and Indiana can't find that at the end of the month.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to watch, and hopefully things take a turn for the better here as we turn the calendar over to 2025. But I do want to transition into some football discussion because, I mean, I know I've kind of already given my final thoughts, at least since the game against Notre Dame ended. But really, since the beginning of the week, there's been a lot of really good news on the Indiana football front when it comes to the transfer portal, retaining your important players. I feel like Kurt Signetti and the Indiana football program could not have asked for a better holiday week when it comes to important pieces like Aiden Fisher, Mikhail Kamara, Elijah Surratt. I believe he made that official. I remember initially seeing it was Mike Pachak, one of the support staff for Indiana football. He just posted a picture of a Waffle House. It was before Elijah Surratt had said anything. I don't know if that ended up becoming official or if that was Surratt's way in making it official. But either way, tons of good news for Indiana football. They also landed Fernando Mendoza, excuse me, in the transfer portal to likely be that next starting quarterback, especially now that, Taven Jackson has entered the transfer portal. So lots of good news when it comes to thinking about the future for Indiana football and being able to sustain at least similar type of success to what you experienced this season.
It's funny to me because just about every time I've left the house this week to go do something big has happened in the portal.
Yeah.
And it feels like every time I leave to do something big's happening and I can't catch a break with that. But I think Indiana has definitely killed it in the transfer portal. And you really couldn't have asked for anything better, I would say. Landing your young quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, who's a redshirt sophomore only, someone who's going to have eligibility going forward is huge. And in addition to that, retaining all those key players who I thought some of which were going to go to the draft. I know a lot of people were saying Kamara or Fisher.
Yeah, I really thought he was going to be gone. Yeah. I didn't think Kamara was going to stick around.
I mean, I had a rough sketch of who Indiana was going to lose to the draft. And those players, those two guys were definitely on it. So being able to not only retain those guys, but add around in all the holes that you need to fill is huge. And I think Indiana has killed it so far.
And it really just goes to show, and then again, I don't have like numbers in front of me or anything like that, but there's been a lot of talk that Indiana's NIL kind of war chest has been substantial compared to what many people would think, especially when it comes to the football side of things. When you have this many talented players that I'm sure you could look at any power program in the country for college football, and if any of these guys who are on a college football playoff appearance team, anybody would want any of these guys if they decided to jump in the transfer portal. And so it's very fortunate for Indiana. And it really just goes to show how much they believe in Signetti being able to continue this, keep the train moving forward going into 2025. I mean, we already saw that the entire coaching staff minus Tino Sinceri is going to be back for next season as well. And so it's very, we've been saying uncharted territory for Indiana football since pretty much the midway point of this season. And it looks like things are going to continue to move in that trajectory with another year of high expectations. And the schedule is not as favorable, but you do avoid Ohio State. You do avoid Michigan next year, but you replace it with road games at Oregon. You go to Penn State, you go to Iowa. But really outside of those three games, I think you could look at the schedule up and down, and you could even win some of the games that I just mentioned, but all of the games that I'm not mentioning right now, I'm not going to go through the entirety of the schedule. I did that a couple of weeks ago. I do think it's safe to say, now that we know that kind of the nucleus is returning, and of course we'll have to wait and see how guys like Fernando Mendoza work out and that sort of thing. But I think there will be expectation for Indiana to be in that upper mid tier at the very least for the Big Ten when it comes to football next season.
Oh, definitely. I agree. And even you look at this season, who would have thought that Michigan and Washington were going to fall off so much? So the schedule, same with UCLA on the road for the first conference game, the schedule was built to be pretty difficult. The games weren't freebies. So Indiana, sure, they got a little lucky this year, but they're still scheduling a hard schedule for next season. And I'm excited to see how they can compete in regular season against, real tough teams, hopefully rebound the other way from that Ohio State game this season.
And another thing that will be really cool to see is, because of course you go to the beginning of this past season, of course, Memorial Stadium wasn't nearly at capacity the way that we saw it from the Nebraska game onward. I mean, I'm not saying Indiana's going to sell out the entire season. Maybe they will, but it's going to be cool to see, even for, the games against an Old Dominion or Indiana State, whoever it may be. It's going to be nice to see the crowd already bought into what's been going on now that we have an entire year of the Signetti experience under our belt.
It's actually funny looking back at those first few weeks of the home season against whoever it was, FIU in Western Illinois, and I've got pictures or videos of some of the touchdowns, and just seeing how empty it was, like entire sections having a couple dozen people. It's just really funny and admirable to see how far away Indiana came in such a short period of time.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun to see. I love seeing Indiana football go through this experience. Of course, it was a shame that they couldn't get it done against Notre Dame, but hey, who knows? Anything is possible with the 12-team playoff. They could very well find themselves, at the very least, contending for another spot next season. So, Dylan, I appreciate your time, especially during your holiday break away from classes and all that stuff. And good chatting with you on Indiana basketball, football, and all that good stuff. And anything of interest coming up for you on HoosierIllustrated.com that people should check out?
That's a good one. I appreciate you having me on. We've got a lot of basketball focus coming up with the football being done. And I've got one big feature story coming up in the next week or so. I talked to the CEO and founder of the Hoosier Ticket Project, which brings all of the fans of underprivileged families to Indiana football and basketball games. I had a feature story with the founder of that. So I'll have that up in the next week or so to keep an eye on.
Good stuff. As always, check out everything going on at HoosierIllustrated.com. Dylan, your Twitter handle or X handle, depending on what you refer to that social network as, you're at Dylan Traeger, right? Or is it underscore?
An underscore in between Dylan and Traeger. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
We got to get that on the next show.
Yeah, exactly. If you're on Twitter or X, give Dylan a follow. He is always up to date with things going on and making sure people know the latest and greatest things going on with IU athletics. So again, appreciate your time, man, and we'll do this again sometime.
Thanks, John. Had a good time today.
Big shout out to Dylan Traeger for taking the time out of his Christmas break and joining me here on a Friday, or I guess, a Thursday night at the time of this recording. And hopefully he's enjoying his little break. I miss those days. I'm not too far removed from them, but it's always nice to be a college student and get that extended time off, especially if you don't have to work in any way, shape, or form. I usually had to work during my Christmas holidays just for a little bit, but I worked at this is a little tidbit that I didn't anticipate sharing, but sometimes my thoughts take me down paths that can be, at least in my opinion, pretty interesting. Maybe you don't find it interesting, but we'll go ahead and share it anyway. But I worked at a local seafood chain in between semesters called Moby Dick. If you're in the Kentuckiana area, of course, you're likely familiar with the seafood chain. But, man, I love me some. I know people don't always like the smell of fish, but seafood is definitely, for me, up there as one of my favorite categories of food, I guess, if that makes sense. But I didn't mind working there. It was kind of odd. There was the staff when I was there was, outside of like the managers and stuff, was mainly high schoolers. So there was times where with me being someone who only came in and worked during the holidays, always kind of felt out of place, and many people kind of treated me like I was an adult, which is a good thing, but like an adult, whereas a lot of the high school workers were, goofing around and stuff. And, I wasn't always included in their nonsensical behavior. Right. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, shout out to Dylan Traeger for coming on and talking Indiana basketball and football here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. All right. A few other things I want to mention and get into briefly before we wrap up things and get to the weekend. I want to start with the Christmas games for the NFL that were broadcast on Netflix. So first of all, a shout out and kudos. Congratulations. We can give them a round of applause too, I guess, to Netflix for figuring out how to live stream events and at least not have any major issues. Now, I didn't watch the first game hardly at all, the Steelers and the Chiefs, but I did pretty much watch almost the entire broadcast of the Ravens and the Texans, which are good. That game was, the game itself was nothing to be super thrilled about when it comes to the lack of competitiveness of between the two teams. But shout out to Netflix for figuring out things and not having issues. At least on, I feel like most people that I've talked to didn't have issues. Maybe you were somebody who did, and if so, sorry about that. But I feel like Netflix kind of had their crap together this time around, as opposed to the when they had the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight, and then go back even further to, I think it was all over a year ago. I think it was. Whenever they tried to live stream and couldn't even get it off the ground, they tried to live stream the Love is Blind finale. And I don't know if my wife's listening right now, but I know she's around. She's a big fan of that show. She was unable to watch that particular event whenever that was supposed to go off on Netflix. I'm afraid she's going to walk in, but it'd be kind of funny if she did. But yeah, so the NFL games on Wednesday for Christmas. One of them kind of a blowout. Of course, the Chiefs taking care of business against the Steelers. I did put a little action on both games, actually. The first part of that came through with me. I took the Chiefs to cover 2.5. They ended up doing so. And then I had high hopes and really expectations in the Texans to put up a good fight against the Ravens. And not even the score that took place in that game, 31-2. I don't think it's indicative of, like, I don't think it means the Texans are bad. They just had a bad game, but man, I thought they had a much better offense than the Houston Texans. I mean, Joe Mixon's usually a sure thing for them. Nico Collins, who's on my fantasy team, he did okay. But I mean, nope. I mean, when you score 2 points, how good could your offense really be? When you have, I mean, literally, you can, if you only score 2 points, that's a safety, right? So, I couldn't believe that the dominating win that the Ravens were able to get. The Ravens are a very weird team. They go from having games like that where they kind of look like a Super Bowl contender to having head scratching losses just because their defense can kind of be hit or miss. And that's the other thing. I thought with how the Texans offense usually goes versus the Ravens defense, I thought it would be a high scoring affair. And that gets back to my betting. I took Texans plus 5.5, and by golly, that didn't happen. And I also took the over in that game, which I believe was somewhere in the 40s. And if the Texans had a pulse on offense, that would have taken care of itself. But unfortunately, because I parlayed that with my leg that did hit, no cigar for that bet. And I've been back on a cold streak as of late. Last week during the opening week of bowl games leading up to the college football playoff, or it might have been the week after that, the playoff. Can't really remember. Doesn't really matter. I was hitting a lot of straight bets and feeling good. But now, it's always ups and downs with sports betting. And I'm in one of those downs, but hopefully I can get a big hit here soon. I've got a little money on. Again, the result of this game will be final, of course, by the time this episode comes out. But tonight for Thursday night football, I've got Seahawks minus 3.5 against the Bears. And currently, of course, at the time of this recording, once again, 6-3 Seahawks at half. And really quick with them, the Bears themselves, I know the Bears they've just kind of sucked for the back portion of the season. Really, you could just say the season as a whole wasn't very good for them considering they're 4-11. But DeAndre Swift on my fantasy team been a disappointment in the back half. And then Kenneth Walker III, now on injured reserve, another running back I've got on my fantasy team who has really been disappointing even before he got put on IR. And anyway, just now that we're kind of at the end of the fantasy season, I can kind of let you know what happened. And I was bragging about how great things were going at the the entirety of the regular season. I got second place. The record of 10-4 was in contention to win the whole thing until I dropped a couple at the very end of the regular season. But the losing streak kind of followed me into the postseason. I had a bye in my fantasy playoffs but then lost my very first game in the playoffs. Um, so I didn't even, the loss continued. Now I'm playing in the third place game against my wife, mind you. And right now she is primed to to defeat me in the final game of our fantasy season, or our playoff season at this point, I should say, and have me on a 4-game, 5-game, whatever it might be, losing streak. So that's disappointing, but still a fun year for fantasy football overall. I'm glad I did it. Disappointed though that I wasn't able to come away with any of the prizes, either the regular season prize or even the playoffs. But it's fun if you've never done fantasy and you've thought about doing it again. Because if you've been within touch with Indiana sports since the beginning, you know that I was contemplating whether or not fantasy football would be worth it. Just because there is a lot that kind of you have to pay attention to each and every week. But I learned that it's kind of addicting to really kind of dive into your rosters and kind of set a depth chart. And if you're into that sort of thing, managing that those types of things, then maybe you'll find it fun. I kind of thought it might be a burden, but hey, like I said, I was all in. If I was going to do it, I was going to be all in, and that's why I think I got some enjoyment out of it. So cheers to my first fantasy season, even though nothing really came out of it other than the fun. But that's what it's all about, right? It's all about fun. All right. A couple more things to get into before we wrap it up. Michael Penix. I know I teased him getting his very first start in the NFL with the Falcons. And just a quick recap in case those missed what they did in their first matchup. And I had that pulled up here before I started talking about Thursday Night Football. But yeah, Penix against the Giants last week, for those who didn't see, 18 for 27, 202 yards and an interception. But the Falcons did come away with the win against the Giants, 34-7. Not a terrible start for Penix. Of course, you would have liked to have seen a touchdown pass as opposed to an interception. But I'm sure he will likely, especially with only a few games remaining and a chance to, I don't know if they've clinched a playoff spot or not. I don't have the playoff picture in front of me, but they'll take on the Commanders this weekend. That'll be very interesting to watch. 2 rookies, one of them who is without a doubt probably the best rookie quarterback of the season, Jaden Daniels for the Commanders. And then somebody with Penix being kind of what could have been, because he's been sitting behind Kirk Cousins all season long. And this will be a very interesting matchup to see, if Penix is able to go in and lead the Falcons into a big road victory against another rookie quarterback. That'll go a long way for Michael Penix, not just for the rest of the season and the postseason, but really kind of his stock going into his sophomore campaign, if you will. He'll have some high hopes and expectations going into 2025. So, of course, wishing Michael Penix Jr. the best of luck, and give me a reason to cheer for another NFL team. Because I've mentioned before that my wife and I root for the Bills, and that's more so for her. She really gets into it, and I like to see the Bills do well. In fact, I hope they win the Super Bowl this year. That'd be something awesome to just see. And then it'd be nice to see, if Penix is doing well with the Falcons, it'd be nice to root for the Falcons on the side as well. So wishing him the best when it comes to his NFL career. All right. And then I was going to get into, I think I'll just save this for another time. I've done a lot of harping on just kind of the analysts being annoying about college football. And it kind of bled into, I was glad to see some of the NFL guys like Troy Aikman and company kind of share their 2 cents on the nonsense that has come with this college football playoff, and in particular the ESPN guys and the SEC coaches that just feel the need to never shut up about their team that didn't get in. And just props to those like Troy Aikman, as I mentioned, for going out of their way to just kind of mention that just because a team doesn't have a bad or a good showing in a playoff game, it doesn't mean the team's bad. There are bad showings in the NFL all the time between playoff caliber teams. I mean, look at the Ravens and the Texans. The Texans are going to win their division. Granted, the AFC South is pretty weak, but the Texans have a winning record, and it wouldn't surprise me, especially with C.J. Stroud. I know he's a young quarterback, but he has the ability to have these Texans, if they're playing well at the right time, they can make a run in the postseason. But that doesn't always happen, right? You have games like when you face against someone who could be the MVP in Lamar Jackson. Things don't always go the way that you hope they do. You have bad games. And you get blowouts in the Super Bowl. The championship game, much less any playoff game, doesn't always have to be the most competitive affair. And if it is, then that's obviously what you hope for as a fan of the sport. But that's just not reality a lot of the time. So just wanted to mention, I guess, the appreciation for those outside of the college football world talking about the nonsense that's been going on with some of those, in particular, Kirk Herbstreit. He's not the only one, but Kirk Herbstreit's made himself look like a puppet over the last, really since the day after Indiana lost to Notre Dame. He just made himself look foolish. And I this was the year that I kind of began to like Kirk Herbstreit a little more. But again, it just seems like he's being spoon-fed things to say by the four-letter network and really those that have power with the SEC. So again, I'll put that to bed, and maybe we can go down that path a little bit later. And then before we wrap things up, I want to shout out the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. If you haven't checked that out, their most recent episode that they put out, I believe it was on Christmas Eve, they put together, I say they, Kyler Staley and Drew Rosenberg, of HoosierIllustrated.com. They put together their all-time Indiana basketball draft. So they had a point guard, a shooting guard, a small forward, a power forward, and a center, and a six-man, and it's just kind of a fun little segment, I guess, that they put together in this special episode of their podcast. It doesn't say who each team has, but they did post this on their social media, and I'll let you know which team I chose. But team one is Isaiah Thomas, Steve Alford, Victor Oladipo, George McGinnis, Walt Bellamy, and then Alan Henderson as the sixth man. In team two, Yogi Ferrell, Damon Bailey, Calbert Chaney, Trace Jackson Davis, Cody Zeller, and Juwan Morgan as the sixth man. A lot younger players in team number two. But that's the team I decided to go with as well. But I'm curious. If you guys haven't checked out that episode, do so. Check out Talking About the Hoosiers. Kyler and Drew do a great job, and a very unique thing they did on this past episode of theirs. So, and also check out everything going on at HoosierIllustrated.com. Subscribe to Hoosier Illustrated on YouTube, and give us a follow on Twitter or X if you find yourself on that social media platform looking for things about Indiana sports. One of us is usually posting about something throughout the day, whether it be myself, Kyler, Drew, Dylan, or Alec Lasley. Great team of dudes to work with as we go through the college football and college basketball seasons. So that'll do it for a Friday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Until Monday, we'll be back again to do more things, talk more. We'll react to Indiana basketball's non-conference game against Winthrop. Not too sure about what we're doing for a post-game wrap-up this weekend. If we do one, we'll post about it online. And, of course, you can always hit the notifications bell on our YouTube channel to know if we're going to go live for a post-game wrap-up show. But if not, we'll react to it on Monday. And until then, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.